Welcome to our channel, where history comes alive with drama, depth, and discovery. Today we explore the chilling and fascinating secrets of the Tower of London. From royal prisoners to forgotten tales, join us as we uncover hidden histories buried within these legendary walls. Get ready for a journey through time, unveiling the secrets of the Tower of London. Royal prisoners and hidden histories explored. Part 1. The Tower Rises, Origins of a Fortress. The Tower of London stands as a silent witness to over 9 centuries of English history. Its stones have absorbed the echoes of kings, queens, prisoners, and executioners. But before it became a symbol of dread and confinement, it was built to command awe. In 1066, William the Conqueror emerged victorious at the Battle of Hastings. To secure his control over the newly conquered land, he needed more than an army. He needed a symbol of dominance, a fortress that would remind the English who held power. Thus began the construction of what we now call the Tower of London. The first structure was the White Tower, started around 1078. It was designed to intimidate the citizens of London and to guard against rebellion. Built with stone imported from Caen in Normandy, the White Tower was unlike anything the locals had ever seen. Its thick walls and towering presence struck both fear and fascination into those who approached it. Rising nearly 100 feet into the air, it loomed over the early medieval skyline. Its very presence altered the relationship between the rulers and the ruled. A clear message from the Normans: resistance would be crushed. At first, the tower served primarily as a military stronghold. Its location along the River Thames allowed for swift reinforcement and supply. But it wasn't long before its role began to expand. By the time of Henry I, it had become a royal residence as well. Kings lodged there, held council, and even celebrated coronations. The White Tower was no longer just a fortress, it was becoming the very heart of royal authority. As centuries passed, additional walls and towers were constructed. Richard the Lionheart and Edward I both contributed to its development. It grew into a concentric castle, a fortress within a fortress. The inner and outer curtain walls made it nearly impenetrable. Towers such as the Bloody Tower and Wakefield Tower were added to the growing complex. Each new feature reflected the growing sophistication of medieval military architecture. Yet each stone also whispered stories of diplomacy, ambition, and war. The tower's early history is not just about brick and mortar. It's about the assertion of power in a land that was not yet fully tamed. It's about the birth of a monarchy that would endure for 1,000 years. In those first 100 years, the tower came to embody the strength and vulnerability of the English crown. It was a place to rally in times of crisis, a place to retreat when threats loomed, and, in time, a place to imprison those who threatened the crown's authority. The tower's early purpose was practical, yet symbolic. For the English, it was a foreign imposition. For the Normans, it was a fortress of legitimacy. Over time, it would become something far more complicated. Not just a castle, not just a palace, but a prison, a treasury, a zoo, a mint, and a place of final reckoning. Even in those earliest days, the lines between refuge and captivity began to blur. Prisoners would come, so would queens, and in the shadow of its walls, destinies would be rewritten. But before it held queens accused of adultery or princes destined to disappear, it stood as the embodiment of William's iron rule. Its rise marked the beginning of an age, of conquest, of rebellion, and of the never-ending pursuit of power. The tower had been born from war, but it would soon become the stage for something even more compelling: history in its rawest and most human form. From its Norman foundations to its expanding walls, the tower became a paradox. It offered protection, and it inspired fear. It was the crown's shield and its sword. And in every brick laid under that gray London sky, the future of a kingdom was written. What began as a fortress would become the most infamous prison in British history. But its beginning was not about captivity. It was about control. And the world that grew around it would never be the same. Part 2. Stone and Shadow, Transformation into a Prison. As the Tower of London grew in size and importance, so too did its darker purpose. What began as a fortress to defend and impress would slowly evolve into a place of fear and isolation. By the 12th century, the tower was no longer just a royal residence or military stronghold. It had become a prison, not just in function, but in reputation. Its cold walls began to enclose not only rebels and traitors, but noble prisoners and even royalty. The transformation was not immediate. It crept like a shadow, settling stone by stone over the years. The earliest recorded royal prisoner was Ranulph Flambard, Bishop of Durham. Ironically, he had been responsible for helping to build parts of the tower during William II's reign. But in 1100, when Henry I came to power, Flambard was arrested for extortion and imprisoned in the White Tower. Yet his story took an unusual turn. He managed to escape, not through bribery or royal pardon, but with a smuggled rope hidden inside a wine cask. It was a dramatic event, but not the last of its kind. Soon, the tower would become known less for escapes and more for the misery of those who never left. Throughout the 13th and 14th centuries, the tower's role as a prison grew more formal. New towers were constructed not just for defense, but for confinement. The Salt Tower, Beauchamp Tower, and Bloody Tower each became infamous for the souls they held. Nobles accused of treason, clergymen who had crossed the king, foreign princes captured in battle. All would come to fear the words sent to the tower. Unlike the dark, damp dungeons we often imagine, many of the tower's prisoners were housed in relative comfort. Noble prisoners were given rooms, servants, and even allowed visitors. Yet these privileges did not ease the psychological weight of imprisonment. The real punishment was isolation, disgrace, the uncertainty of whether a trial or an executioner's blade awaited. By the time of Edward III, the tower had become synonymous with political imprisonment. It was no longer simply a place to hold criminals. It was a tool of royal power. Those who dared challenge a throne, or who merely fell out of favor, were quietly locked away. And the tower's symbolism began to change in the minds of the people. It was no longer just a fortress of stone. It was a fortress of secrets. Some prisoners were famous. Others vanished without trace. But all left echoes behind. Etchings carved into stone walls. Names and prayers scratched by desperate hands into the surface of history. Even today, visitors can see those silent testimonies in places like the Beauchamp Tower. Words left behind by those who waited in fear for their fate. The tower's evolution into a prison reflected the shifting nature of monarchy itself. As rulers centralized their authority, they needed a place to display their dominance. Not just over land, but over people. The tower became the final word in political conflict, a place to silence dissent, and to send a chilling message to others who might oppose the king. It was not just a building, but a performance of power, a symbol of the king's will carved in stone and sealed with iron. And for those trapped behind its walls, hope often flickered and died with each passing day. Yet for all its fearsome reputation, the tower was also a place of waiting. Waiting for justice, waiting for mercy, waiting for death. And in that silence, the very stones seemed to breathe with the weight of history. The transformation was complete. The Tower of London was no longer just a castle. It had become the kingdom's most notorious prison, and it would hold that title for centuries to come. Part 3. The Royal Captives, Kings, Queens, and Claimants. Among the tower's many roles, none is more haunting than that of holding royalty in chains. To imprison a king or queen was not merely a matter of law. It was an act of ultimate political drama. In the Tower of London, royal blood offered no immunity, and in many cases, it became a curse rather than a shield. Some came through its gates as crowned rulers, others as would-be monarchs, stripped of titles and surrounded by betrayal. Perhaps the most chilling example of royal captivity came with King Henry VI. A weak and mentally unstable monarch, Henry was twice deposed during the Wars of the Roses. After his second fall in 1471, he was placed in the Tower. He never left. On the night of May 21st, 1471, Henry VI died in the Wakefield Tower. Officially, it was said he died of melancholy, but few believed it. Whispers spread that he had been murdered, likely on the orders of Edward IV, the man who had usurped his throne. The Tower had become not only a prison, but an execution chamber, a place where dynasties ended in silence. Then there were the tragic fates of the princes in the Tower. In 1483, 12-year-old Edward V and his younger brother Richard, Duke of York, were brought to the Tower by their uncle Richard, Duke of Gloucester. They were never seen again. Their disappearance remains one of England's greatest unsolved mysteries. Though Richard III declared the boys illegitimate and claimed the throne, suspicion has shadowed him ever since. Did he have them killed to secure his crown? Or did someone else eliminate the last threats to his rule? The truth may be lost, but the tower walls remember. Royal women were not spared the tower's grasp. Queen Anne Boleyn, Henry VIII's second wife, is perhaps the most famous female prisoner. Accused of adultery, incest, and treason, and was arrested in May 1536. She entered the tower through the court gate, not as queen, but as a condemned woman. Even in disgrace, she carried herself with regal composure. She was imprisoned in royal lodgings, the very same ones used for her coronation 3 years earlier. On May 19th, she was executed on Tower Green. Her final words still echo across the centuries. Other queens would follow. Catherine Howard, another of Henry's wives, was also confined and executed at the Tower. Lady Jane Grey, the 9 Days Queen, was held there before her beheading in 1554. Though her rule was brief, her fall was devastating. Used as a political pawn, Jane was only 16 when her young life was taken. She died a prisoner, but her story became legend. The Tower's treatment of royal captives was never consistent. Some were held in comfort, others in despair. Some were executed, others pardoned. But all felt the sting of betrayal, the loss of freedom, and the closeness of death. For kings and queens, the Tower was more than a place of stone and iron. It was the final stop in their rise or fall. Powerful one moment, powerless the next. Their royal status, once an impenetrable armor, was stripped away brick by brick. The royal captives remind us that the Tower was not merely a tool of punishment. It was a stage, a theater where loyalty and treason were tested, where the drama of England's crown was played out with deadly precision. And as each royal entered its gates, the Tower whispered a quiet truth. Even the most powerful can be brought low. For those who wore a crown, the Tower's embrace was cold and final. Its stones recorded their downfall. Their sighs, prayers, and final words linger in the damp corridors and locked chambers. In the Tower, kings became prisoners. Queens became martyrs. And the shadow of the crown never shone more darkly than when cast across its ancient walls. Part 4, Anne Boleyn's Final Days, Love, Lies, and the Axe. When Anne Boleyn entered the Tower of London on May 2, 1536, she arrived not as a queen, but as a fallen star. Just 3 years earlier, she had ridden through London in triumph for her coronation. Now, she returned through the same gates in silence. Betrayed, broken, branded a traitor by the very man who had once adored her. Anne's rise to power had been swift and dazzling. She had captivated Henry VIII with her charm, intelligence, and ambition. He had divorced his first wife, Catherine of Aragon, and defied the Pope to marry, but what the king once fought for, he now cast aside. Her failure to produce a male heir had soured their union, and darker forces were gathering around her. The charges were shocking. Adultery, incest, conspiracy against the king, and was accused of having affairs with multiple men, including her own brother, George Boleyn. Whether Henry believed these charges or simply needed an excuse to be rid of her remains one of history's great questions. Upon her arrest, Anne was taken to the Tower and placed in the royal apartments. These were the same rooms where she had stayed before her coronation. Familiar chambers, now transformed into a gilded prison. Anne's dignity never left her. She protested her innocence passionately. She prayed. She waited. And all around her, the court prepared for her execution. 5 men were arrested and tried alongside her. They too were condemned to death. Among them was her brother George, whose fate crushed Anne's spirit. She was found guilty on May 15th. Her sentence, to be burned or beheaded at the king's pleasure. Henry chose the sword. To his credit, or perhaps guilt, Henry sent for a skilled executioner from France. This swordsman, known for his swift and clean kills, arrived in secret. Meanwhile, and prepared to meet her fate. In her final days, she was reported to have moments of laughter and tears. She spoke often of her innocence. She took comfort in her faith. On the morning of May 19, 1536, Anne Boleyn walked to the scaffold on Tower Green. She wore a gray gown and a red petticoat, the color of martyrdom. Before the gathered crowd, she gave a calm and measured speech. She did not blame the king. She asked those present to pray for her. Then, kneeling upright, she removed her headdress and arranged her hair. The French swordsman struck swiftly. Her head fell in a single blow. Anne's body was placed in an old arrow chest and buried in the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula. No grand tomb, no royal ceremony, Just silence, and a name that would echo through centuries. And Boleyn's execution shocked Europe. Some viewed her as a guilty woman who had overreached. Others saw her as a victim of politics, sacrificed to clear the way for Henry's next marriage. Either way, her fall transformed the Tower once again. It was no longer just a place of imprisonment. It had become a place where queens could die. Her ghost is said to haunt the Tower still. A pale figure walking near the site of her death, headless, or holding her severed head. Whether true or imagined, her presence lingers in the popular imagination. For, and was not just a queen lost to time. She was a symbol of ambition, love, betrayal, and injustice. In the Tower's long history, many entered with hope and left in silence. But few left a legacy as enduring as in Boleyn's. Her death marked a turning point in Tudor politics, in royal marriages, and in the fearsome power the Tower now held over England's nobility. The Tower did not kill her, but it watched her fall, and it still stands bearing witness to that terrible day. Stone by stone, memory by memory, blood never truly washed from its floor. Part 5. The Princes in the Tower, Innocence Lost. Of all the stories whispered through the cold stones of the Tower of London, none is as haunting as that of the two young princes. Their tale is one of innocence swallowed by ambition, of youth caught in a ruthless game for the crown, and of a disappearance that has never been fully explained. Edward V was only 12 years old when he became king in April 1483. His father, Edward IV, had died suddenly, leaving the boy to inherit the throne. But being king in name was far from being king in power. The young monarch was soon placed under the protection of his uncle, Richard, Duke of Gloucester. It was a protection that would prove deadly. Edward and his 9-year-old brother, Richard, Duke of York, were taken to the Tower of London. At first, the Tower served its traditional role as royal lodging before the coronation. But the coronation never came. Instead, the boys remained inside, and the outside world was fed a different narrative. On June 25, 1483, Parliament declared Edward and his brother illegitimate. It was claimed that Edward IV's marriage to their mother, Elizabeth Woodville, had been invalid. The crown was offered to Richard of Gloucester. He became King Richard III, and the two princes were quietly forgotten. They were last seen playing in the Tower Gardens during the summer of 1483. After that, silence. No funeral. No official notice of death. Just a growing fear, and a chilling absence. Rumors swirled quickly. Had they been murdered? If so, who was responsible? Richard III has long borne the blame. As the one who stood to gain the most, he became the prime suspect in both popular belief and later histories. But there were others who may have had motive. The Duke of Buckingham, Henry Tudor, the future Henry VII, even members of the Tower's own staff. In 1674, workmen digging near the White Tower discovered a chest containing 2 small skeletons. Believed to be the remains of the princes, they were reburied in Westminster Abbey. But no definitive proof was ever found. Even modern science has not solved the mystery. DNA testing has been suggested, but royal protocol has kept the remains undisturbed. What is certain is that 2 boys vanished without justice, and the Tower of London was the last place they were seen alive. Their fate has gripped writers and historians for centuries. From Shakespeare's dark portrayal of Richard III to countless historical inquiries, the story has never faded. It remains a symbol of lost innocence, and the danger that even children faced in the battle for power. The Tower became a tomb without a body, a monument not just to those who died within, but to those who simply vanished. The chambers that once echoed with the laughter of 2 royal brothers now lie silent. Their absence speaks louder than any confession. Many visitors to the Tower say they feel a chill when passing the bloody tower. Some claim to have seen ghostly figures of 2 boys in white nightgowns, holding hands, peering through barred windows, looking for a world that forgot them. Their ghosts, whether real or imagined, carry more than fear. They carry the weight of a question that history has never answered. What became of Edward V and Richard of York? Were they smothered in their sleep? Buried beneath the tower? Hidden away by loyal servants? Or spirited abroad in disguise? We may never know, but the tower knows. Its stones remember. Its silence hides the truth. The princes in the Tower remind us that even the young could not escape the cruelty of royal ambition, that crowns came at a cost, often paid in innocent blood, and that the Tower was not just a place where people died, it was a place where they disappeared forever. Part 6. Lady Jane Grey, the 9 Days Queen. In the summer of 1553, a fragile young woman was led into the Tower of London. Her name was Lady Jane Grey, barely 16, highly educated, a devout Protestant, and the great-granddaughter of Henry VII. She entered not as a prisoner, but as a queen, crowned in theory, never in the hearts of the people, and certainly not in the fate that awaited her. Lady Jane's story was not of her own making, it was crafted by ambitious men, chief among them John Dudley, Duke of Northumberland. With King Edward VI gravely ill and without a male heir, Northumberland saw an opportunity. He convinced Edward to name Jane his successor. By doing so, he bypassed Mary and Elizabeth, Edward's half-sisters, and thus on July 10, 1553, Lady Jane Grey was proclaimed Queen of England. She was brought to the Tower in royal procession. The ancient fortress was prepared once more to receive a monarch, but the celebrations were thin, and resistance was already building. Mary Tudor, daughter of Catherine of Aragon, was not willing to be set aside. She rallied supporters in East Anglia. Her Catholic faith and legitimate claim to the throne drew thousands to her cause. Within days, the tide turned. Support for Jane evaporated. And on July 19th, just 9 days after her reign began, the Privy Council declared Mary the rightful queen. Lady Jane was no longer a monarch. She was now a traitor, stripped of her crown. She remained in the Tower, now a prisoner, still in the same royal apartments, but no longer wearing royal robes. Her father-in-law, Northumberland, was executed almost immediately. Her husband, Guilford Dudley, was also held in the Tower. Jane's fate remained uncertain. Mary initially seemed inclined to mercy. She may have seen Jane as a pawn rather than a threat. But rebellion changed everything. In early 1554, Thomas Wyatt led a revolt against Mary's proposed marriage to Philip of Spain. Though Jane had no part in the plot, her very existence was dangerous. She was a Protestant symbol, and as long as she lived, she remained a rallying point for those who opposed the Catholic queen. Under pressure from her advisors and Spain's ambassador, Mary signed Jane's death warrant. The execution was set for February 12th. That morning, Guilford Dudley was executed first. Jane saw his headless body carried past her window. She showed no outward fear, only calm resignation. Then she was led to Tower Green, not to the public scaffold at Tower Hill, but to the private execution site reserved for royalty. She carried a small prayer book. Her last words were a testament to her faith. She declared herself a servant of Christ. Kneeling, she tied the blindfold over her eyes. She struggled to find the block. In one of the Tower's most tragic moments, she cried out, "What shall I do? Where is it?" A hand guided her. The axe fell, and Lady Jane Grey was no more. She was buried in the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula, near the bones of Boleyn, another queen who had met her end in the shadow of power. Lady Jane's reign was brief, her story eternal, a symbol of innocence destroyed by ambition, of youth used as a pawn, and of how the Tower could cradle both a crown and a coffin. She remains one of the Tower's most poignant ghosts, a queen for 9 days, but remembered for centuries. Her name whispered through stone corridors, a silent reminder of the cost of politics and the fragility of royal favor. Part 7. Elizabeth I under watch, Princess in peril. In the spring of 1554, the Tower of London received a prisoner unlike any other. She was not a criminal, nor a traitor proven. She was a princess, and the daughter of Boleyn. Her name was Elizabeth, and her future would one day make her England's greatest queen. But on that cold March day, the shadow of the scaffold hung over her like it had over her mother. Elizabeth was 20 years old, brilliant, poised, and dangerously poised between loyalty and suspicion. Her half-sister Mary Tudor now sat on the throne, a Catholic queen ruling a divided realm. And Elizabeth, as a Protestant and next in line, was both family and threat. The fuse that brought her to the Tower was the Wyatt Rebellion. Led by Sir Thomas Wyatt, it aimed to overthrow Queen Mary and prevent her marriage to Philip of Spain. Mary's enemies saw Elizabeth as a beacon of hope. Whether Elizabeth knew of the plot remains uncertain. But in times of fear, suspicion is enough. On March 17th, Elizabeth was arrested at Whitehall. She was taken by barge down the Thames. Rain fell heavily as the boat approached Traitor's Gate, the river water dark and cold. The walls looming above her, she stepped onto the stone steps, the same steps where so many had entered and never left. It was Palm Sunday. The symbolism could not have been more ominous. Elizabeth later recalled that moment with haunting clarity. "I am the daughter of a king," she is said to have declared, refusing to be cowed. But inside, she must have feared she would follow her mother to the block. She was confined in the royal apartments within the tower, the same quarters where she had once stayed as a child. Now they were her gilded prison. She was allowed a small household, watched carefully, spied on, every word weighed for evidence of guilt. Mary's counselors, especially Bishop Stephen Gardiner, urged the Queen to sign Elizabeth's death warrant. They believe her survival threatened Catholic rule. But Mary hesitated. Perhaps it was sisterly love, or political prudence, or fear of provoking rebellion from Elizabeth's powerful supporters. Elizabeth was interrogated repeatedly. She denied all involvement in the rebellion. She chose her words carefully. Denying neither loyalty to Mary nor her Protestant beliefs, she walked a political tightrope with remarkable poise. But one misstep could mean death. Weeks passed, then months. Elizabeth grew ill. Whether from the strain, the damp conditions, or fear, no one knows. But her health worsened. And still, Mary would not give the final order. By May 1554, pressure from Philip of Spain may have helped shift Mary's stance. He saw Elizabeth as a political tool, not a threat. On May 19th, exactly the anniversary of Anne Boleyn's execution, Elizabeth was released from the Tower. But not to freedom. She was placed under house arrest at Woodstock Palace. Still under watch, still in danger, she had survived. Barely. Her time in the Tower left a permanent mark. When she became queen in 1558, she never forgot that cold stone fortress. She rarely visited it, and when she did, it was with heavy symbolism. She had looked into the face of death, and death had turned away. From that trial, a monarch was born, not of entitlement, but of endurance. The Tower had tried to break her. Instead, it forged her. In the silence of her chambers, in the weight of her lineage, Elizabeth became steel. She learned that words could save lives, and that silence could be more powerful than defiance. She left the Tower not just as a princess, but as a survivor, and in time as Gloriana, the Virgin Queen, the woman who would rule an empire. Part 8. The Fall of the Seymour Brothers. In the turbulent aftermath of Henry VIII's death, the Tower of London once again became a stage for ambition and betrayal. Two brothers rose to unprecedented power, and then fell with equal force. They were Edward Seymour and Thomas Seymour, names once whispered in reverence, later cursed with the echo of treason. Edward Seymour was the elder, uncle to King Edward VI, and named Lord Protector of England during the king's minority. It was a title of extraordinary authority. Effectively, he ruled in the king's name, with Parliament and the Privy Council beneath him. At first, Edward moved with confidence. He pushed Protestant reforms, weakened the power of the nobility, and took control of royal policy. But his leadership was harsh. His arrogance alienated allies, and his ambitious reforms created enemies. His younger brother, Thomas Seymour, held a different kind of ambition. He was charming, impulsive, dangerous in his desire for proximity to power. He had been given the title of Lord High Admiral, and married the Dowager Queen, Catherine Parr, just months after Henry VIII's death. The match scandalized many, especially young Princess Elizabeth, who had lived in their household. Thomas Seymour soon turned his attention toward the throne, not through war, but through manipulation. He attempted to gain custody of the young king and cultivate influence by courting Elizabeth. His intentions were transparent and increasingly reckless. When Catherine Parr died in childbirth in 1548, Thomas grew more desperate. He broke into the king's chambers one night, allegedly to rescue the boy from his protectors. The action was rash, and it exposed his true ambitions. Edward Seymour had tolerated his brother's schemes for some time. But now public scandal and royal suspicion could no longer be ignored. In January 1549, Thomas was arrested and imprisoned in the Tower of London. The trial was swift, the charges damning: attempting to kidnap the king, plotting to marry Princess Elizabeth without royal permission, and undermining the authority of the Lord Protector. He was found guilty, and on March 20th, 1549, he was executed on Tower Hill. His headless body was buried within the Tower grounds. The rise and fall of Thomas Seymour was complete, but the Tower was not finished with the Seymour name. Edward Seymour's own fortunes began to unravel shortly thereafter. Though he had rid himself of his troublesome brother, he had not secured loyalty from his political allies. Discontent with his rule grew. Riots broke out across the country. The council turned against him. In October 1549, Edward was arrested and taken to the Tower. He spent nearly a year there. His enemies debated his fate. Eventually, he was released in 1550, but not forgiven. He returned to court, diminished in status. By 1551, new allegations emerged. Accused of plotting to murder members of the Privy Council, he was once again arrested, and this time the charges stuck. On January 22, 1552, Edward Seymour was executed on Tower Hill, his body buried near his brothers, two men of towering ambition, two brothers undone by their thirst for control. The Tower had witnessed their rise and recorded their fall, its stones etched with whispers of betrayal, the echo of footsteps on cold floors, a reminder that power won through proximity to the crown is always a dangerous prize. The story of the Seymours is not merely one of politics. It is a tale of family rivalries, unfulfilled dreams, and the deadly dance between favor and downfall. Within the Tower, ambition was both born and buried, and for the Seymour brothers, its walls became their final witness. Part 9. The Tragedy of Lady Catherine Grey. The Tower of London has long echoed with the voices of tragic women. Among them, few stories are as quietly heartbreaking as that of Lady Catherine Grey. She was not a schemer, nor a rebel, but love, lineage, and the politics of succession made her a prisoner. Her fate was sealed not by treasonous acts, but by a marriage made in secret. Catherine Grey was the younger sister of Lady Jane Grey. While Jane's story ended swiftly at the scaffold, Catherine's sorrow was a slow, silent burn. Both women had Tudor blood. Both were descendants of Mary Tudor, Henry VIII's younger sister, and both were, at different points, seen as threats to the crown. After Queen Mary's death, Elizabeth I ascended the throne. She was cautious, unmarried, and without a declared heir. This made Catherine, a Protestant of royal blood, a figure of interest, not just to the court, but to those who dreamed of a different succession. In 1560, Catherine fell deeply in love. The man was Edward Seymour, Earl of Hertford. Ironically, the son of the executed Protector Somerset. They married in secret, without the Queen's consent. In doing so, they broke a cardinal rule of Tudor politics. Royal blood did not marry without permission, especially when that blood was a potential claim to the throne. Soon after, Catherine became pregnant. Her condition exposed the hidden union. The scandal was immediate. Elizabeth was furious. Not only had they married in defiance of her authority, but they had produced a child with royal lineage, a direct threat to Elizabeth's carefully guarded position. In 1561, Catherine was imprisoned in the Tower, not alone, but with her newborn son. A second child would follow, conceived while her husband briefly joined her under looser confinement. The Queen tightened her grip and kept the lovers apart. They would never see each other again. Catherine's time in the Tower was marked by sorrow. She suffered the cold, the isolation, and the weight of maternal despair. Her letters to the Queen were desperate. She begged for mercy, for her children, for her husband, for forgiveness. But Elizabeth remained unmoved. To her, Catherine was not just a disobedient noblewoman. She was a dynastic threat, an alternative to the Tudor line Elizabeth had fought so hard to secure. By 1563, the plague forced Catherine's removal from the Tower. she was placed under house arrest. Still watched, still separated from her children. Her health began to fail. Years of confinement, emotional strain, and longing wore her down. On January 26, 1568, Lady Catherine Grey died at the age of 27. Her death was quiet. Her story largely forgotten by the court. But in truth, it was one of the most poignant tragedies of Elizabeth's reign. She was buried in Yoxford, Suffolk, later reinterred beside her husband in Salisbury Cathedral. Their 2 sons survived. Though declared illegitimate, they lived on. Their bloodline would eventually merge into the royal house. Through them, the Greys left a subtle but lasting mark on English history. The Tower did not claim Catherine's life directly, but it imprisoned her spirit and separated a mother from her love, her children, and her future. In its cold walls, she bore the burden of being both too close and too far from crown. Her name may be a footnote compared to others, but her story is no less worthy of remembrance. For in her tale lies the quiet cruelty of Tudor politics, where love and blood could be crimes, and a secret wedding could lead to lifelong imprisonment. The Tower held many prisoners, but few as softly tragic as Lady Catherine Grey. Part 10, The Babington Plot and the Fall of Mary, Queen of Scots. By the late 16th century, the Tower of London was no longer just a fortress of steel and stone. It had become a mirror of England's anxieties, and few figures embodied those tensions more than Mary, Queen of Scots, a queen by birth, a prisoner by politics, and a threat by the mere fact of her existence. Mary Stuart had once reigned over Scotland, Mary the heir to the French throne, and styled herself Queen of England in defiance of Elizabeth I. Her Catholic faith and royal bloodline made her the rallying point for English Catholics, those who wished to replace the Protestant Elizabeth with a Catholic monarch. She had been forced to abdicate her throne in Scotland in 1567, fled to England, and sought the protection of her cousin, Queen Elizabeth. But Elizabeth saw no sisterhood in Mary's arrival. She saw danger, a rival claim to the throne, and the potential for rebellion, both foreign and domestic. Instead of sanctuary, Mary found captivity, not in the Tower, but in a series of secure estates under constant surveillance. Yet the Tower still loomed, not as her prison, but as the final act in the long drama of her downfall. For nearly 2 decades, Mary was watched, interrogated, and entangled in endless plots, real and imagined. Elizabeth hesitated to act. Executing a fellow queen was unprecedented. It could set a dangerous standard. It could provoke war. And yet Mary's existence threatened everything Elizabeth had built. The turning point came with the Babington Plot. In 1586, a young Catholic nobleman named Anthony Babington conspired with others to assassinate Elizabeth. The goal was to place Mary on the throne. But unknown to the plotters, Elizabeth's chief spymaster, Sir Francis Walsingham, had already infiltrated their network. He devised an elaborate trap, using coded letters passed through beer barrels to Mary. Letters she believed were private, but in truth, they were monitored. And one fatal letter bore her written approval of the plot. It was enough. Walsingham had his proof. Elizabeth had her justification. And Mary had signed her own death warrant. She was arrested and tried, found guilty of treason, and sentenced to death. Elizabeth, ever reluctant, delayed the execution. But pressure from her council and fears of further conspiracies finally tipped the scale. On February 8, 1587, Mary was led to the scaffold at Fotheringhay Castle. Clad in red, the color of martyrdom, she faced death with dignity. She forgave her executioner, and with 3 strokes of the axe, her life ended. Her body was later interred in Peterborough Cathedral, then moved to Westminster Abbey under the reign of her son, James I. But the shadow of her death lingered in the Tower. Though she had never been confined there, the conspirators of the Babington Plot were. Anthony Babington and his fellow Catholics were imprisoned in the Tower's dungeons, tortured, interrogated, and paraded through London before their grisly executions, hung, drawn, and quartered. A warning to all who dared dream of Catholic restoration. The Tower thus played its role in Mary's demise, not as her cell, but as the place where the final pieces of the plot were broken, where her supporters were silenced, and where the machinery of state turned slowly, brutally, and without pity. Mary, Queen of Scots, died not only because of who she was, but because of what she symbolized. A monarch in chains, a Catholic in a Protestant world, and a reminder that bloodlines could be both crowns and curses. The Tower did not take her life, but helped end her cause. And with her death, the last great rival to Elizabeth was gone, yet peace would not follow. Only more suspicion, more secrets, and more souls destined to be swallowed by the Tower's silent stone walls. Part 11. Sir Walter Raleigh and the Tower as a scholar's prison. Not all who entered the Tower of London did, so in chains forged solely by treason. Some arrived with the burden of ambition, of politics, of royal displeasure that turned favor into suspicion. Sir Walter Raleigh was such a man, a poet, an explorer, a courtier, and ultimately, a prisoner. Raleigh's rise under Queen Elizabeth I was meteoric. He dazzled the court with his charm and intelligence, won the Queen's admiration, and secured titles, lands, and influence. He championed English expansion overseas and dreamed of founding colonies in the New World. It was Raleigh who popularized the idea of El Dorado, the fabled city of gold deep in South America. And it was Raleigh who helped plant the seeds of England's colonial ambitions. Yet his fortune rested on the shifting sands of royal favor. When Elizabeth died in 1603, and James VI of Scotland became James I of England, everything changed. Raleigh, once at the heart of power, was now viewed with suspicion. His past arrogance, his open dislike of Spanish diplomacy, and his controversial marriage without Elizabeth's permission, all returned to haunt him. In July 1603, Raleigh was implicated in the so-called Main Plot, a supposed conspiracy to remove James from the throne, install his cousin, Arabella Stuart, and restore certain religious liberties. The evidence was thin, the trial deeply flawed, but Raleigh's enemies were many, and his sentence was death. Yet King James stayed the execution. Instead, Raleigh was sent to the Tower, not into a dungeon, but into the Bloody Tower, a place of relatively genteel confinement. There, Raleigh would spend 13 years. He was not idle during those long years. Far from it. In captivity, his mind blossomed. He wrote extensively. His greatest literary work, The History of the World, was penned during his Tower imprisonment, spanning from the creation to the rise of Rome. It was ambitious, philosophical, and deeply reflective, a scholar's masterpiece. From within prison walls, his wife, Elizabeth Throckmorton, was allowed to join him in the Tower. They even raised their son, Carew. During this time, the Tower became a strange kind of home, where intellect thrived despite the iron bars, and where Raleigh's spirit remained unbroken. Outside, the world changed. James forged uneasy peace with Spain, court factions shifted, and Raleigh's legend grew. Even imprisoned, he was still seen as a man of vision, of knowledge, of fire yet untamed. In 1616, he was released, not pardoned, but freed for one last chance, to lead an expedition to Guyana in search of the elusive gold of El Dorado. It was a risky gamble, sanctioned by a king hoping for riches, yet careful to avoid war with Spain. The journey failed. No gold was found, and worse, Raleigh's men attacked Spanish outpost, violating the very terms of his release. He returned to England disgraced, and with Spain demanding justice. To appease their ally, King James reinstated the original death sentence. On October 29, 1618, Raleigh was executed. He faced death with remarkable composure, jesting with the executioner, and ending his life with the dignity of a man who had tasted both glory and ruin. The Tower of London had been his prison, but also his sanctuary, a place where thought took flight and where captivity could not bind the soul. Raleigh turned stone walls into pages, iron doors into metaphors, and his fall into a legacy that still inspires. In his cell, etched into the stone, his words remained, reminders of a man who never ceased to question, to dream, and to write, even when freedom was only a memory. Part 12. Torture in the Tower, Myth and Reality. The Tower of London is steeped in shadows. Whispers echo through its ancient stones, of screams in the night, of iron devices and twisted limbs, of pain hidden behind fortress walls. But how much of this is truth, and how much born of legend? To uncover the role of torture in the Tower, one must step carefully between myth and reality. Torture was not routine in Tudor and Stuart England. It was never codified into English law, and it was only used with royal permission. Yet in times of political or religious crisis, when the security of the crown was at stake, torture was authorized, and the Tower of London was one of its principal theaters. Perhaps the most infamous device associated with the Tower is the rack, a fearsome contraption designed to stretch the human body, wrenching limbs from sockets, tearing muscle and sinew. It was located in the White Tower's lower chambers, and it was used on those who held secrets the state desperately wanted. One of the earliest known victims was Anne Askew, a Protestant reformer in the 1540s. She was arrested under Henry VIII's reign, accused of heresy, and interrogated for information on high-ranking sympathizers. She was stretched so severely on the rack that she could no longer walk and had to be carried to her execution, burned at the stake. Her resilience became legend, and her ordeal a symbol of religious persecution. Guy Fawkes is perhaps the most well-known prisoner ever to be tortured in the Tower. After the failure of the Gunpowder Plot in 1605, Fawkes was arrested and brought to the Tower. King James I himself authorized the gentler tortures at first, but escalating pain if needed. Fawkes was racked, and his once bold handwriting turned into a near illegible scrawl, a sign of the suffering he endured before naming his fellow conspirators. Yet torture was not always about physical agony. The scavenger's daughter, a lesser-known device, compressed the body instead of stretching it, folding the victim inward, crushing ribs and lungs. It offered an alternative torment, a silent press of pain, rarely used, but always present as a threat. Other forms of duress included manacles, suspension by wrists, and sleep deprivation. The aim was to break resolve, to unlock treason, to unearth plots before they bloomed. However, despite popular belief, the Tower was not a house of horrors in constant operation. Most prisoners were never tortured. Many were nobles, foreign dignitaries, or political enemies who were treated with a strange form of grim courtesy. Interrogation came first, torture only when secrets remained locked tight, and only with explicit royal approval. By the late 17th century, torture had largely fallen out of favor in England. Legal shifts and growing unease about forced confessions led to its decline. The Tower slowly transformed, from a chamber of secrets to a symbol of justice through spectacle. Still, the reputation endured. Visitors came in the centuries that followed, hearing the tales, seeing the instruments preserved in the White Tower. The rack, the scavenger's daughter, the manacles that still hang silently, and so myth and memory fused. Today, torture is part of the Tower's grim allure, a subject of fascination, of dread, of awe. Yet the truth remains more complex. Fewer than 50 confirmed cases of torture in the Tower exist in the records, but those few burn brightly in history's pages, enough to shape the legend and to remind us that pain, whether physical or psychological, was always a tool within the Crown's grasp. The Tower did not delight in torture. It used it with precision, with purpose, and with terrifying silence, a silence that still lingers. In the deepest chambers of England's most infamous prison. Part 13, The Princes in the Tower, Innocence Lost. Among all the stories whispered through the walls of the Tower of London, none is more haunting, more tragic, or more mysterious than that of the princes in the Tower. Two young boys, born of royal blood, swept into a storm of power and betrayal, and never seen again. Their names were Edward and Richard, sons of Edward IV, heirs to the mighty House of York. In April 1483, King Edward IV died suddenly, leaving the throne to his 12-year-old son, Edward V, too young to rule alone. The boy was placed under the protection of his uncle, Richard, Duke of Gloucester. At first, it seemed a move of necessity. a loyal guardian ensuring the young king's smooth succession. But within weeks, the tone darkened. Richard seized control of the government, declared Edward and his brother Richard illegitimate, and had himself crowned King Richard III. The two princes, Edward V and Richard of Shrewsbury, were taken to the Tower in June 1483, officially for their protection. But as Richard's grip on power tightened, their public appearances dwindled, then ceased entirely. By the end of the summer, they had vanished. No trial, no announcement, no bodies, just silence, a void that echoed louder with every passing year. Rumors flew through London that they had been murdered, smothered in their sleep, perhaps buried beneath the tower itself. Others whispered of escape, of secret rescues and hidden lives abroad, but the weight of suspicion fell heavily on Richard III. Despite his denials, despite the lack of proof, in 1674, during building works at the tower, two small skeletons were discovered beneath a staircase in the White Tower. They were reinterred in Westminster Abbey, identified by many as the missing princes, yet no conclusive evidence was ever produced. Modern analysis has been limited, and still, doubt lingers. Historians remain divided. Some believe Richard III was responsible, acting to secure his throne. Others argue he had no clear motive, and suggest rival factions may have acted. Perhaps the Duke of Buckingham, perhaps Henry Tudor, the man who would become Henry VII, and who needed the boys gone to claim the crown. This mystery endures because it was more than a royal crime. It symbolized the end of the Plantagenet age and the brutal birth of the Tudors. Innocence lost in a palace of stone, power built upon a silent grave. The Tower of London was not merely the scene of their disappearance. It was a character in the story, a fortress that swallowed them whole, its ancient walls bearing witness, but never speaking. Today, visitors peer up at the bloody tower, imagining the faces of two young boys gazing from the windows, waiting, wondering, fading from view, until history could no longer reach them. Their story has inspired plays, novels, and countless theories, but no answer. Only questions wrapped in centuries of shadow, and two names that still echo softly: Edward, Richard, the lost princes of the Tower. Part 15, Secrets Behind the Walls, Espionage and Intrigue. Beneath the tower's looming battlements, beneath its cold stone corridors and ancient stairways, lurked not only the ghosts of prisoners, but the silent march of secrets, plots, and shadowy whispers of espionage. In the age of shifting allegiances and ruthless ambition, the Tower of London became more than a prison. It became a crucible of clandestine warfare. From the reign of Elizabeth I onward, the fear of betrayal was ever present. England stood against powerful enemies: Spain, France, and even the Pope. The Reformation had split Europe, and loyalty was a currency weighed heavily in blood. Within this charged atmosphere, the Tower evolved, a place not just for keeping prisoners, but for extracting information, sifting through deception, and breaking the silence of spies. Sir Francis Walsingham, Elizabeth's spymaster, orchestrated a web of informants across Europe. But when threats came close to home, the Tower offered a quiet place for interrogations and sometimes torture. It was here that many conspirators of the Babington plot were held. Their plan, to assassinate Elizabeth I and place Mary, Queen of Scots, on the throne, unfolded in secret letters, encrypted and smuggled, until Walsingham's agents deciphered them. One by one, the conspirators were arrested, dragged to the Tower, where truth was extracted with careful pressure, and when enough was known, they were taken to their execution. In that same web of intrigue, the Tower also became the reluctant host to Mary, Queen of Scots. Though not for long, her imprisonment was mostly elsewhere. Her fate was sealed through the letters that passed through the hands of spies, each one intercepted, each one copied, until her guilt was undeniable. Even during the English Civil War, the Tower was drawn into the struggle. Royalists and parliamentarians both viewed it as a prize. Its control symbolized dominance, and within its walls, capture messengers and enemies were questioned, sometimes never to be seen again. During the Jacobite risings, more secrets passed through its gates. Scottish noblemen and suspected sympathizers were confined, often questioned about broader networks. The walls held their words and their regrets. One of the most infamous prisoners of espionage was Guy Fawkes, captured before he could detonate his gunpowder beneath Parliament. He was brought to the Tower in 1605. His refusal to speak was met with days of increasing pain. Eventually, he confessed, his signature on the confession document barely legible. A broken man, a failed assassin, and a warning. Yet for all the darkness, there was also sophistication. The Tower was not merely a chamber of torture. It was a place of intelligence. Letters were scrutinized, codes broken, agents unmasked, all beneath the gaze of the Tower's shadowed keep. Even into the 18th century, the Tower still played its part in guarding secrets. Men like John Churchill, 1st Duke of Marlborough, and later Sir Robert Walpole, navigated political schemes where imprisonment in the Tower was always a threat. The very idea of ending up behind those gates struck fear into courtiers and conspirators alike. The Tower knew everything, not because it spoke, but because it listened. Behind its stone walls, truths unraveled, loyalties crumbled, and the cold silence of its dungeons was louder than any shout. In its long history, the Tower has seen swords and crowns, but also masks and mirrors, false names, hidden letters, invisible ink, and plots that dance just beyond discovery. The Tower's ghosts are not only the condemned, but the whispered secrets of empire, the hidden war of information, a quiet legacy, etched not in stone, but in silence. Part 16, The Tower's Role in the English Civil War. As England plunged into civil war in the 1640s, the Tower of London stood silent, watching from the banks of the Thames. Its walls had seen monarchs come and go, but this time, the very future of monarchy itself was in question. The English Civil War was not just a battle between king and parliament. It was a reckoning, a struggle for the soul of a nation. And the Tower, a fortress built to protect the crown, found itself caught in the storm. When war erupted in 1642, Charles I faced a growing opposition. The parliamentarians, or Roundheads, challenged his authority, questioned his divine right, and slowly took control of key strongholds. The Tower, once a symbol of royal power, became a prize they were determined to claim. By 1643, the Tower of London was in the hands of Parliament. Its lieutenant, Sir John Conyers, had been appointed with the confidence of the Commons. It was no longer a safe refuge for royalists, but a tool of the revolution. Inside its gates, the Tower still held its familiar roles. It stored arms and ammunition, guarded high-profile prisoners, and loomed over London as a symbol of shifting power. During the war, several royalist figures were held within its walls. Nobles suspected of aiding the king, clergymen loyal to the crown, even civilians whose loyalty was deemed suspect. Interrogations resumed, but this time, they served the cause of Parliament. In 1649, the unimaginable happened. King Charles I was tried, convicted, and executed. Though he was not held in the Tower, the fortress trembled with the weight of that decision. A king beheaded on the orders of his own people. It marked a profound turning point. After the king's death, England became a republic, the Commonwealth of England, ruled by Oliver Cromwell, and the Tower adjusted, no longer a royal fortress, but a military stronghold of a new regime. Cromwell's men used the Tower to hold former allies who had turned against the revolution and remaining royalist sympathizers. It also became a secure store for gunpowder, a mint for currency, and a symbol that the old ways were gone, at least for now. But the Tower never fully shed its royal identity. Its very stones breathed monarchy. Its architecture whispered loyalty to the crown. And when the monarchy was restored in 1660, with Charles II returning from exile, the Tower once again shifted, quietly adapting, silently standing, Some of those who had supported the regicide found themselves walking through its gates as prisoners. Just as the tides of war had turned, so too had the tower's allegiances. Its loyalty was not to any man, but to the prevailing power. One figure who became forever linked to the tower during this time was Colonel Thomas Pride, a staunch parliamentarian, famous for Pride's Purge. His forces had helped secure Parliament's control of London, including the tower. But even men like Pride, who wielded power in turbulent times, knew that the tower could be a fickle ally. Its gates opened for many, but its walls remembered all. In the years after the Civil War, the tower remained a focal point for conflict, a place where ideological battles were contained, if not resolved. It served as a reminder that no matter who ruled, no matter the flag above the gate, the tower endured, watching the rise and fall of factions, the declarations of kings, the manifestos of revolutionaries. It is in this constancy, this unshaken presence amid chaos, that the tower held its greatest power, not in its weapons or its cells, but in its memory. Part 17, The Tower in the Age of Enlightenment and Decline. As England moved into the 18th century, the roar of civil war faded, monarchs sat more securely upon their thrones, and a new force began to shape the nation. The Age of Enlightenment, an era of reason, science, and shifting ideas about power and punishment. The Tower of London, once the dark heart of royal authority, began to change, not through fire or war, but through silence and a gradual decline in fear. The dungeons grew quieter, the executions fewer, public appetite for blood lessened, and a new view of justice emerged. Torture, once common in earlier centuries, fell out of favor, seen as barbaric, uncivilized, unworthy of an enlightened society. Still, the tower remained a prison, but more symbolic now, a reminder of a darker time, rather than an active tool of tyranny. One of the final echoes of that darkness came in 1746, with the Jacobite rising. Charles Edward Stuart, known as Bonnie Prince Charlie, sought to reclaim the throne for the House of Stuart. His forces marched into England and were eventually crushed at the Battle of Culloden. After the defeat, the tower opened its gates once more. Dozens of Jacobite rebels were imprisoned. Some were officers, some nobles, others simple men who had marched for a cause. Among them was Simon Fraser, 11th Lord Lovat, a cunning Highland chief, caught in the tangle of shifting allegiances. In 1747, Lovat was beheaded on Tower Hill. His was the last public execution at the Tower, an end, in many ways, to an era. As the decades passed, the Tower's role continued to evolve. It became more a garrison than a prison, housing soldiers and storing weapons. The Royal Mint continued to operate within its walls, producing coin for the realm, but whispers of its darker history remained. Tourists began to arrive, drawn by stories of ghosts, of queens weeping in the night, of traitors' footsteps echoing through empty corridors. The tower became a museum in spirit, before it ever was in fact. Writers of the 18th and early 19th centuries helped preserve the legends. They painted the tower as a place of tragedy, romance, and mystery. Novels and pamphlets embellished the stories, and the public imagination took hold. One of the tower's final royal prisoners was a man named Henry Lawrence, an American revolutionary, captured at sea in 1780. He was held in the tower for over a year. A reminder that even as England expanded its global influence, the tower still had its place in the world of power and punishment. But Lawrence was not tortured, nor paraded. He was treated with a degree of civility, reflecting the shift in values, from fear to diplomacy, from cruelty to confinement. By the early 19th century, the tower's days as a royal prison had all but ended. No more noble heads would fall, no more confessions extracted in dark chambers. Its ravens remained, its yeoman warders still walked the grounds. But the tower itself had become a monument, a place not of active terror, but of memory and mourning, a symbol of England's long and bloody journey through monarchy, through war, through Enlightenment, to something new and uncertain, the tower had stood, not because it was feared, but because it endured, adapted, and bore witness to it all. Part 18, The Tower Today, Memory, Tourism, and Legacy. Today, the Tower of London still stands, rising from the north bank of the Thames, its ancient stones weathered but strong. Its walls no longer echo with screams or swords, but with the footsteps of visitors and the whispers of long-forgotten voices, is no longer a place of dread, but of fascination, a living museum, cradling nearly 1,000 years of British history. Millions walk through its gates each year, drawn not only by its architecture, but by the stories it holds, stories of power, of pain, of survival, and of silence. The tower has become a stage where history performs for the living. The yeoman warders, or beefeaters as they are often known, still guard its grounds, no longer with halberds and suspicion, but with charm, with tales steeped in legend and truth. Their guided tours are not dry recitations. They are performances, layered with laughter, tension, and reverence, each tale bringing to life the drama that unfolded here. Visitors gaze upon Traitor's Gate and imagine Anne Boleyn's final journey. They peer into the bloody tower and wonder if the princes still linger in shadow. They touch the cold iron bars that once held rebels, lords, queens, and even saints. The crown jewels are another marvel, housed in a secure chamber within the tower, a symbol of monarchy's resilience and the changing face of British power. They sparkle with centuries of history, guarded day and night, as much for their value as for what they represent. But the tower is more than tourist attraction. It is a guardian of memory, a keeper of contradiction, a place where grandeur and brutality coexist, where majesty and misery intertwine. Historians continue to uncover layers beneath its stones. They explore its architecture, its tunnels, its records and relics. New insights still emerge, challenging long-held beliefs, recasting villains as victims, and victims as players in a larger, complex game. The tower has also become a site of national reflection. On Remembrance Day, its moat has been filled with ceramic poppies, a sea of red for the fallen of the First World War. Modern symbolism meeting ancient stone, creating something profound and unshakably British. Education thrives here too. School groups gather in its halls. Young minds absorb the lessons of the past, the dangers of unchecked power, the consequences of ambition, and the ever-changing face of justice. Yet, despite its evolving role, the tower has not lost its soul. There is still a hush in certain corners, a chill that history alone cannot explain. Some say the tower is haunted, not just by ghosts, but by memory itself, by the weight of what happened here, and what still lingers in the stone. As Britain has changed, from empire to modern state, from monarchy to constitutional balance, the tower has changed with it, never fading, always present. It is a symbol of continuity, of resilience, of warning, and wonder. From William the Conqueror to the modern era, from scaffold to souvenir shop, the Tower of London endures, not because it must, but because it matters. It is a place where the past meets the present, where stories find voice, and where history stands tall. Stone by stone, memory by memory, echo by echo, and as long as those stones remain, the tower will continue to speak, to watch, to remember, and to remind us that even in silence, history never sleeps. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the Tower of London's untold stories. If you enjoyed this journey through royal imprisonment and hidden truths, like, subscribe, and share. Stay curious, and remember, history isn't just about dates, it's about the people who lived, struggled, and shaped our world.